After Jesus had spoken these words, he looked up to heaven and said, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you. Since you have given him authority over all people to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is the eternal life, that they may know that you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. So now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had in your presence before the world existed. I have made your name known to those whom you gave me from the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything you have given me is from you. For the words that you gave to me, I have given to them, and they have received them, and know in truth that I came from you, and they have believed that you sent me. I am asking on their behalf. I am not asking on behalf of the world, but on the behalf of those whom you gave me, because they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. And I am coming to you, Holy Father. Protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. The word of the Lord.
Last week, you were so helpful with my sermon that I thought I'd give it a try again. I know, don't go to the well one too many times, right? But you were stellar, so I'd like to hear some thoughts. Now, I'm not going to ask you to share with your neighbor this morning. I'd like you to share with me what thoughts come to mind when you hear the words eternal life. Last week, I think I overlooked the balcony, so if anybody from the balcony has a thought, you get to go first. Anyone? What comes to mind when you hear the words eternal life? You are all just blank. Heaven, okay? Life with God. Good. Peace. Eternal peace. Promise. An inheritance. These are great. What else comes to mind? We think about eternal life. Sandy? Say it again. I would never have to fear death. Yeah, good. Yeah. Resurrection. Yeah. New life. New life. Yeah. God's timetable. Joy and gladness. Reassurance. Good. Well, on this weekend, when we're remembering those who died in service to our country and honoring them, and following a week when there were dozens killed by terrorists in England and Egypt, it's right for us to focus this morning on eternal life. And it just so happens that the gospel lectionary reading for today, that comes from the Gospel of John, is focused on a number of things, but eternal life is part of it. Now, before deciphering this opaque passage, and by the way, Craig, you did a really nice job reading it, it's just difficult. I feel compelled to confess my love-hate relationship with the Gospel of John. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is much more easily understood. As I heard a man say one time, in those Gospels, Jesus speaks in plain English. Actually, he spoke in Aramaic and Hebrew, but everyone within earshot knew what this man meant. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus sounds like someone that most of the time we can understand. However, in John, there are these times when he pontificates in this lofty jargon that we wonder if we're overhearing some Middle Eastern guru speaking in a mystical language, and the only ones who can only understand him are the ones who know the secret handshake. In the first three Gospels, Jesus shares memorable parables, poignant sayings, and despite his use of hyperbole and metaphor, we usually understand the gist of what he's talking about. But in John, his words resemble vague philosophical meanderings sometimes. It's only in John that Jesus says, "On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." Another winner comes from the 10th verse of today's passage. "All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them." Okay. If Jesus truly communicated in such abstract concepts, and I doubt that he did, his disciples were either constantly raising their hands for clarification or feeling as if they were trapped in some ancient version of who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, who's on third. Invariably, we use the term eternal life to mean what happens to us after we die. And those were some of the comments: heaven, resurrection, new life. However, we discover in the Scriptures that Jesus had a much more expansive meaning of the term. For Jesus, eternal life referred not only to what happens to us after we die, but also to a special state of existence in this life. If we venture back to the 4th chapter of John, we read the story of Jesus encountering the woman at the well. You remember this story where he talks about living water. He says, "The water that I will give will become a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." Now, he does not mean that he has discovered the fountain of youth, water that possesses magical powers that will allow someone to live forever. He uses the term eternal life to mean a unique quality of life. In chapter 7, Jesus says it is life that is infused with God's Spirit. And then in chapter 10, he calls it abundant life. While we view life in this world and life in the next as two distinct modes of existence, Jesus taught that we can actually experience eternal life not only later, but now. We can get a taste of heaven on this side of the veil. And that's pretty remarkable considering the state of the world when John wrote this gospel. He wrote his gospel near the end of the 1st century, after the other 3 were already compiled. He wrote it to a community that was severely oppressed by the Roman army and persecuted by Jews who were throwing them out of the synagogues. That's why in the Gospel of John, when Jesus speaks of the world, he is not talking about God's good creation. He's talking about a hostile environment. For John, the world represents the domain of Satan. In John, the world represents everything that opposes God: injustice, evil, immorality. In short, the dark side of life. The author makes this clear very early in his gospel when he writes, "The light," meaning Jesus, "has come into the world, but the people loved darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil." In our passage today, which is actually, as Sudi was telling the young ones, it's actually a prayer, and this is the closing prayer of the Last Supper. Jesus says that despite the bad shape of the world, his followers can taste eternal life. What does that mean? It does not mean skipping down streets of gold or being startled when the angels overhead are dive-bombing newcomers. Jesus says, this is eternal life, that we may know God. To know God does not mean that we have some access to some sort of cryptic wisdom about the transcendent one. To know God is to trust God. And to trust that God is love, and God urges us to allow Christ-like love to pulse through our veins. When we hear the words eternal life, either our cynicism shoots down wishful thinking, or our thoughts jump to ideas of what happens after death. Is it possible for us to expand our understanding of eternal life to include a certain quality of life during our current existence? When Jesus speaks of eternal life in the present, I think he's talking about those moments when we become fully alive. When we gaze at a loved one and an inexpressible feeling just explodes within us like a geyser. When the distress of another person pulls us into their orbit. When an injustice ignites a passion in us to strive for the good. When music sends our soaring spirits heavenward. When the beauty of God's creation calls out to something deep within us. When a need prompts us to give generously. When we gather around a table with those we love and we enjoy a meal that not only nourishes our bodies but really nourishes our souls. When we're in prayer and draw closer to the divine. When we eagerly sacrifice for another person. Author and poet John O'Donohue writes, when your life awakens and you begin to sense the destiny that brought you here, you endeavor to live a life that is generous and worthy of the blessing and invitation that is always calling you. Eternal life now is when we have an experience that sparks our soul and seems to transport us to greater heights. Will you lift someone's spirits today? Will you release unkind thoughts? Will you extend courtesy and respect to a total stranger? Will you take advantage of that moment when you can speak words of healing? Jesus says this is eternal life, that we may know God. And part of what it means to know God is to trust God for what will become of us after we die, so that we can live today by our hopes, not our fears, by our dreams, not our nightmares. Cynicism, greed, narcissism, and despair are eager to pilot your life. But putting your trust in God can liberate you from their control so that you can be kind and compassionate, fair and faithful. As Jesus was giving these final instructions to his disciples, he prayed that they would experience eternal life. And the way for them to do it was not to withdraw from this terrible world they were in, neither was it to go along with the world, but rather to continue Christ's ministry in that world. It was as if Jesus was simply throwing down the challenge. Are you going to walk away from the unpleasantness around you? Are you going to ignore the beggar at your gate? Are you going to shut out the crying of the suffering widow? Are you going to simply curse the darkness? Or are you going to spread light? God intends for us to live joyful lives. And we discover that joy when we forge loving bonds with others. When we love, our soul touches the soul of another. And we desire the same good things for the other person that we would desire for ourselves. Our purpose is to spread love. And if it is not, then we might as well just surf the internet or head to the mall.